Hello, my name is Philip Camella, and today we're going to have a conversation beyond science and religion. Now, one thing science and religion should agree upon is that there's one world, but science and religion approach this one world differently. Science attempts to describe the world as an object. They attempt to understand it from the outside in. Religion, on the other hand, tends to approach the world from the inside out, although some religions tend to objectify symbols of spirituality, such as Jesus on the cross. The ultimate purpose is to gain an uplifting of an inner experience. In religion, we want to connect with the divine internally, but there's still one world. And this is something that has always puzzled me, because in the case of religion, one question all of us have asked, either quietly or in groups, is if there's one God, then why do some religions treat others as blood enemies? As we're doing this interview here with David Lieberman, who I will introduce in a minute, Hamas has just attacked Israel. It's something that we cannot ignore, since the title of this show is Transcendental Judaism. So why did this occur? Don't the Muslims and the Jews pray to the same God? What is going on here? And this is a question that really underscores the conflict we have, at least in one level of our society. Now, in this show, I'm not going to try to answer this extremely difficult problem head on, but we're going to talk about David's new book and see if we can at least find a way to open and broaden the discussion on these intractable problems. On today's show, I'm happy to have David Lieberman, as I mentioned. He's just published a new book entitled Transcendental Judaism, Enlivening the Eternal Within to Uplift Ourselves and Our World. And as I mentioned, based upon current events, we're going to need a lot of uplifting to deal with these ongoing struggles. And so maybe we could start making some progress here. Now, David, he was raised in a Reformed Jewish household. He's been a long student of the Torah. He's a spiritual director of a organization in Arizona called the Valley Beit Midrash, which is committed to a pluralistic, forward-looking Jewish learning. Interestingly, he has been a teacher and a management consultant for the past 35 years and lives in Arizona. David, thank you for joining us. I hope you're doing well.
Philip, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So, as I mentioned before the show, I have read your book, and it's one of these books that I would have to recommend because it's a mind opener, and those are the best kinds of books. And sort of as we ease into the book and this show, maybe we could start with the basic question of what led you to write this book.
Good question. In the beginning of the book, I talk about a transcendental and a spiritual experience that I had the very first time, the very first day that I learned how to meditate. And it was an awe-inspiring experience. I can go through the experience a little bit later, but it was one that opened me up to having a real sense of the unity of the universe, feeling like I was part of a greater whole. Now, that in itself didn't cause me to write the book, because that was a secular experience, and this is a book about Judaism. But a couple decades later, I started to study Judaism in a little bit more detail, studied Torah. Many of your listeners will know Torah just is the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And the other texts generally are referred to as an extension as studying Torah. And it was a very interesting experience for me. Initially, the words made intellectual sense to me to some extent, and there's contradictions in Torah, and Jews are taught when they study Torah to argue and discuss and try to make sense of what's going on. But then, after about having studied Torah for about a dozen years, Philip, what happened was one day the words on the page started to jump out at me. They had a very deep and close meaning to me, like when Jacob was going on a trip and he laid down to rest. He put his head on a rock and he woke up in the morning and he said, "Gee, had I known that God is in this place, and I didn't realize that." And that may seem like a nothing statement to you, but to me, my regular experiences of this transcendence that I had been practicing during my meditation now for dozens of years, I all of a sudden realized that at any time I have a sense that God is here with me. And I put those two things together. My initial experience and ongoing experience of that sense of God is here with me. And then the words of Torah said the same thing. And when that happened, I said, something's going on here. I've got to learn more about what's really happening. What do these words mean? What does this experience of spirituality really mean? How does it carry with me in such a real way? And how can I, if it turns out to be something worthwhile, can I share this with other people?
Yeah.
And that's what caused me to write the book.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting what drives people to want to endure the marathon task of putting their thoughts on a piece of paper and publishing it. I went through that myself, and it's almost as if it has to happen. And it's almost as if, there is some, whether it's inspiration, whether it's a voice in your head, or it's something you cannot ignore. And I remember in my own case was I basically quit a job and took a year and a half off to put these thoughts on a piece of paper. And it's really good to hear other people going through it. And I really think that what you've done here is really make something approachable. Now, I don't want to assume sort of the knowledge of the listener. And so when we talk about Reform Judaism, what do we compare ourselves to? What do you, I don't want to use the word orthodox, but I want to use the word maybe standard or common. What does Reform Judaism do that's different than, let's say, the standard teachings of Judaism?
Okay, standard is not really the greatest word to use, but I can answer the question. Reform Judaism is more on what I would just say the liberal side of Judaism, where individuals are given the freedom, the opportunity to interpret the Jewish laws, follow the commandments. Many people, practically all of your listeners, will have heard of, quote, the 10 commandments, but in fact, there are hundreds of commandments. The Hebrew word is mitzvot, or singular, a mitzvah, in the Torah. And Reform Jews seek out and follow the ones that feel meaningful to them on a personal basis, and they live their lives in a meaningful way according to a choice they make with regards to how closely they follow the commandments. So that's more on the liberal side.
Okay.
As we move along the continuum, we can throw out names like conservative and orthodox, but basically it just moves more to the right in terms of groups of people following the commandments more closely, following the traditions more closely, and doing it less on an individual basis and more on a group basis, like that. So,
Well,
I think,
that's good. Yeah, that's good because I'm a lawyer in training, and I've always thought there were similarities between interpreting a document such as the U.S. Constitution and interpreting a base religious text. And it's different, but the similarities are: do you read the words as being engraved in stone for all time, or do you apply your current knowledge, understanding, experience to interpret the words in a present context? And that is something that it plays out right now in politics. You have the strict constructionists and you have the more liberal interpretations, and it's a similar thing. Now it gets into a topic in your book that I find very interesting, which is this whole concept of evolution, and we're really talking about a spiritual evolution here. You talk about the Jews' evolving interpretation of the Torah. Okay, and so let's stop there. What do you mean by that? Your use of the term evolving in the context of Jews' understanding of the Torah or of God.
Actually, I can mean a couple of things, and I do refer to a couple of things when I talk about the evolution. One of them is that the commandments, again, there are hundreds of them, in biblical times. And when I mean biblical times, I'm talking about when the temple stood in Jerusalem. Well, there were two temples. The first was destroyed, as was the second, and the second was destroyed in the year 72 of the year 70 of the Common Era. And during biblical times when the temple stood, there were certain of the hundreds of commandments that tended to stand out and feel more meaningful to the people. And many of those commandments had to do with animal sacrifices and other rites, rites, around the performance of different commandments. And again, just to paste upon the sociology of the time of thousands of years ago, those type of activities felt meaningful to people. And so they tended to stand out. Now, with the destruction by the Romans of the Second Temple in the year 70, we moved into another era of Judaism beyond biblical Judaism, and we're in that era now. We call it Rabbinic Judaism. And what we had to do was figure out, how are we going to follow the commandments and stay close to God, because we could no longer do the animal sacrifices, because those are only allowed to be done in the temple. And so other of the commandments, other of the mitzvot, came to the forefront and evolved. Not that we weren't doing them before, but they came to the forefront just due to the change of circumstances. And these are commandments regarding prayer and acts of charity and repentance and study of the Torah and things like that. And so we just finished the holiest day of the year in the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, where we ask for forgiveness for our sins and try to make a clean slate for the next year. this is a very meaningful type following the mitzvot in rabbinic times. Again, not that we didn't do it before, but now it's elevated. Now we evolve into a new era, which I go out on a limb. Of course, there's no scientific proof for any of this, but I say we could be entering yet another era of Judaism that nobody's heard of until I wrote this book, called the Transcendental Judaism. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that, and I'm going to try to make this short because there's so much to say about it, but Judaism has always taught that we understand and follow and internalize the commandments at multiple levels. And actually, it's at 4 levels. At the very literal or plain level, we just read the words and we understand what they say. And that's called the level of pshat. And we can also understand the mitzvot and follow them at another level that is referred to as remez, which is, it's a hint. It's maybe an allegory is told. And remez comes with a sense of a feeling. There's some emotion involved as we read the very same words, but we interpret it at a different level, more of an emotional level. And the third level is called drash, which is more the intellectual level, where we maybe make some analytical sense of what's going on. And I can give example. Any mitzvah can be interpreted at any level, but some to me tend to lend themselves to other levels. Okay, and then there's the mystical level, which in Hebrew we say sod. And that's the level that sort of goes beyond emotion, beyond thought, and we understand it sort of just deep in our souls. And I'm saying that traditionally, the mitzvot have been followed in biblical and in rabbinic times more at the level of pshat, the plain level, and remez, the emotional level, and drash, the intellectual level. And I'm saying we may have an opportunity now to internalize and understand the mitzvot more at the mystical level, in a different way, in an evolutionary way, where it touches us beyond our normal senses. The level of sod, I call this Transcendental Judaism, and it's another type of evolution. So besides the type of evolution where different mitzvot tend to come to the surface, there's also the evolution in the way and at the level with which we internalize and understand the mitzvot. And although some people, I will admit, although I typically don't, will perform the mitzvah or a mitzvah at the what I will call lower levels, the traditional levels, they may still sense that feeling of awe, that sense of transcendence, that sense of oneness that I talked about at the beginning of our talk. I don't know how often that happens, but through the meditative quieting of the mind, we have a better chance of experiencing the mitzvot at the level of sod. And I talk in the book about Jewish sages centuries ago that used different types of meditations in order to internalize, experience that spirituality, that sense of transcendence through different meditative techniques. So I hope that wasn't too long an answer, but it gave a couple of different perspectives on what I mean by evolution.
Yeah, that's good. Now I'm gonna try to simplify this from my own perspective, and it really goes to what I said in the beginning about objectifying the source or the subject matter of worship or spirituality. And I find a lot in various religions, and we could sort of guess which ones they are, where the object of worship is worship as an other thing, as something to curry favor with, and then it devolves, and we've all seen it, and I will say this, it devolves sometimes in a lip service where somebody recites a prayer 53 times. They don't know really what they said, but they feel like if they said it, then therefore they're going to be favored in some way.
Yeah.
And then you have the integration, more of the integration of the teachings, inside yourself, where you start embodying the purposes of spirituality, of the religion in the first place. And if that's another continuum. I mean, we know for a fact in all religions, and I would probably say more so in Western than Eastern religions, there tends to be an objectification of the object of worship as the other, waiting for the other to come and save you, as if he or she is going to wave a magic wand and you're going to be a better person just instantaneously without sort of absorbing the teachings. So that's why I like the transcendental aspect. The other thing, though, that I think is really a difficult question here, is what I find is that most religions, they try to be true to the underlying purpose. I think ultimately that's the goal. And some of them are more conservative. They say, well, we better, and let me just give an example, the Quran. They try, the object is to do exactly what this book says, because that's the way to remain faithful to it. But your view, and I would agree with this, is that if the underlying purpose is ultimately to be good people, to treat others as your brothers or as a family, then if some words in an old book say you're supposed to do something different, but the underlying purpose is brotherhood, then maybe your interpretation does have to evolve. And so I think that's another problem we have in today's society, where we have sort of a mixture of people all over the place. Between the strict constructionists and the evolving liberal interpretation, and that's part of the way of the world. It leads to a question, which is who is the audience for your book? Who do you see as the audience?
I see my primary audience for the book are liberal Jews, maybe Reform Jews, who don't really deeply internalize the mitzvot, the commandments. They don't necessarily follow them, but they have some sense, they're looking for some sense of spirituality. And they're wondering, where am I going to find that? And, we know that a lot of Jews start to look to Eastern religions for that, right? We've heard the term Jew-boo, right? or Hindu, right? People who are looking outside for that sense of spirituality. And my book goes into the theology, and we haven't even talked about this yet, which actually is in support of your book, The Collapse of Materialism, because I talk about how, our material world evolves from no thingness, from nothingness.
Right.
And my book demonstrates through both traditional Jewish texts and mystical Jewish texts, Kabbalah, that there is that sense of oneness, that sense of transcendence that is deeply built into the Jewish religion and Jewish tradition. And so let's look at those liberal Jews who have been used to interpreting the mitzvot at a certain level, but it isn't connecting so much with them, and they start looking elsewhere. And I'm saying, no, you don't have to look elsewhere. There is a very deep spiritual tradition in Judaism in our own backyard where you can go to gain spiritual fulfillment. To me, that's my main audience. And then it can spread out from there.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think that the audience could and should be broader, and that was why I asked the question, because I think that there's a good number of people that I know and have met over the years that really, even if they were raised in a certain religion, they're questioning the underlying tenets, or they're questioning whether it's right for them. And I think there's a lot of mystery and misunderstanding among the religions over what they really believe in. And we tend to, and this gets into your duality issue, which topic which we'll get into in a second here. But it's almost as if it's good for public perception if there's feuds between religions. Instead of folks looking for common grounds, there's a lot of folks who want to have this eternal feud, conflict. And I think the transcendental aspect here really opens the door to me to some common ground. I mean, clearly there's an overlap with Eastern religions. I mean, I think, and when you have a discussion about, God is within us, we're the fulfillment of God, the expression of God, it's our true self. It sounds so much like Atman, which is the personal self in Hinduism. The goal is to join with the universal self, which is Brahman, and to experience moksha. And I frankly don't see it going in any other way. I don't see it going any other way, because if there is any truth to spirituality, to the divine, then there is something beyond the material world, and there's some unity. I mean, there's plenty of most of the great religious texts point towards a unity of humankind, or a unity of spirit.
Absolutely.
Or of God. And so what you're saying, and I think, and I like, maybe you could talk about this, what you're saying is that, it's a goal here to incorporate or internalize that oneness into your daily life, which is critically important. So
yeah.
Why don't you talk about that a little bit? And I haven't asked you about the religious texts yet because there's so many of them, but I'm sure there's some that you use as inspirational sources for that. So
Right.
So what are your thoughts about? So why don't you talk about this duality, non-duality, and that aspect of your thinking?
Sure. Well, in the Hebrew Bible, we start out, by saying that, in the beginning, God created the earth, and God, that happened from nothing. So everything, began from no thing. And mystical Judaism, which is often referred to as Kabbalah, talks about how this nothingness, of course, in spiritual terms, not in scientific terms, in religious terms, how this nothingness manifests into our existing world. And duality was introduced during this process. I talk about in the book the concept of the 10, I'm going to use the Hebrew word sefirot. Sefirot just means qualities or levels. And when we move when creation moved from no thingness, which again in Judaism we call the Ein Sof. Ein Sof just means without end. So from no thingness to thingness, it began to obtain qualities, and we introduced duality and like that. And there was a great 20th century Jewish academician and Kabbalist named Gershom Scholem. And he wrote a book and made a beautiful, beautiful statement in it. He said, if you view the manifest universe and all its differences simply as a tree, right? Because we got leaves in a tree, we've got branches, we have thorns, we have flowers, we have roots. There are many different things in the universe. But if you use that analogy, then the Ein Sof, the oneness, that one no thingness from which sprang the universe, the Ein Sof can be viewed as the sap of the tree. Now, let's think about that for a minute. The source, the single source that has no qualities, but it has the infinite intelligence sort of baked into it, infinite creativity baked into it. And, and as it flows and becomes manifest in the universe, as the sap flows through the tree, buds begin to, leaves begin to sprout, thorns begin to grow. And so what Gershom Scholem is saying is that everything came from this single source of no thingness, which then manifests into our world. That's that's a Jewish view of the unity of the universe, that I had the sense of during my first experience of letting my mind transcend, quiet down, and instead of being focused on the leaves and the thorns and the bark and everything that's out there, when my mind settles down, its attention naturally can go back to that source. And by repeating that action on a regular basis every day, we infuse some of that infinity, that infinite intelligence, that infinite creativity. We have an experience of it every day. And just like if we wanted to get better at playing the piano, if we practiced it every day, we would gain muscle memory. It would become part of our lives. And so when we do that on a regular basis, experience that transcendence on a regular basis, then that unity, that sense that we all are from the same thing, and the differences are there, they're superficial simply because we're living in a world of duality, but deep down, we share the same essence.
This is Philip Camella. This is Conversations Beyond Science and Religion. I'm happy to be talking with David Lieberman, the author of the new book, Transcendental Judaism. And we're really talking about right now about this sense of oneness, and what really strikes me on this note is that we have sort of this battle going on between science and religion/spirituality on this topic, because many of the leaders, not only current leaders in religion and spirituality, but also the source authors, the source religious figures, had some sort of spiritual experience that connected them with a higher power, and it pervades religion. And so, but then you have science saying, well, we can't measure that sense of the divine. We can't bring you into a laboratory and hook up sort of tubes and wires to your brain and record the spiritual experience. I think it's been attempted, but no scientist that I'm aware of is convinced that the sense of the divine has scientific validity. On the other hand, for those quote unquote scientists who do experience this sense of the divine, and there's quite a few, all of a sudden bells go off and they're like everybody else. Say, wow, I didn't realize that there was another aspect to experience. I thought that everything was just, gears and pulleys and ball bearings and screws and nuts. I didn't realize that there's this whole other world out there. And you have a lot of people who, if they're not fully converted, then at least they're more empathetic to this other sense of the world. Taking this one step further, and I do think this is extremely important, is that the hard problem of consciousness, which I've talked about before on this show, I think I talked about it last week, in fact, is how consciousness arises from the gray matter of the brain. So how does something like this internal experience of yourself, awareness of the world, of spirituality, arise from the gray matter of the brain? And my answer is it doesn't, it can't. And so you have materialistic scientists trying to either explain away spirituality, or somehow when they get to that ephemeral topic, they will talk about, oh, it must have come from the neurons. We don't really understand how complicated this is. And someday we're going to have a supercomputer that's going to put it all together. Neurons are going to explain all this. So it really is an amazing sort of phenomena to me. But one thing that I've focused on is we need more scientists having spiritual experiences. So it really is because you started off the discussion, you're talking about what led you to write the book, and the words jumping off the page and this connection, and I have to say, I don't know what, I'm sure you've spoken to a lot of people. Most people have had some kind of experience, not exactly the same, but
you're right.
It's really amazing how many people, but we don't talk about it.
They don't talk about it because they don't have words for it.
Yeah.
It may or may not connect with their religion. And the other thing is, it feels so natural, it feels so right, that it doesn't ring a bell of concern with them. It's like, oh, finally, I'm coming home, or something like that.
Right.
Now, if I may, I want to pick up on something you said that I think is very, very insightful. And that is, you talked about leaders of religions, and not just modern ones, but ancient ones. They had a spiritual experience somehow, whether they were sitting, in a cave, or under a banyan tree, or whatever they were doing.
Right.
And they said, this is something, the experience and the situation around this that led me to this experience is wonderful, and I'd love to share that with people.
Right.
And but then what happened was, it became a kind of exclusive set of experiences that they thought had to be followed and shared with people.
Right.
And I'm saying, as you are saying, that is not, in my opinion, an exclusive set of experiences. It's that person's set of experiences. And when I go back to Gershom Scholem's analogy about the Ein Sof as the source and all the various different parts of a tree, any experience we have can take us back to the source, because the source is at the root, so to speak, of any experience we have.
Right.
So if one religion or culture had a sage who felt, due to a certain set of circumstances, a great truth back to the source through a series of commandments that needed to be followed, that is one path back that is enriching and sends people back to the source. If another person, another sage, was sitting out in nature and sort of communing with the wind and the stars and the earth, like our Native Americans,
Right.
and they found that series of experiences took them back to that sense of oneness, then all that does is enhance, build more bridges, give more cultures different ways to connect back to the oneness.
Right. Right.
And I'm not going to go on and on and on, but
no.
different cultures find their own ways back. They're not exclusive, they're additive, and they're beautiful. And they all take us back to the oneness.
Right. Right. And the more I read about this, think about it, I just think that we are children of spirituality. We are young. We're learning.
Oh, yes.
We're working through our differences. Because I do think there's different levels here. I don't want to get. I mean, part of the problem in these kinds of discussions is that the vocabulary may move into what some would think to be a new age kind of hocus pocus. But there's no doubt that there is a increased understanding of who we are over time. It may take a long time, but I do think that ultimately, and I'm an idealist, obviously, but is that the different religions all start pointing to the same practice, same points, and everything. Over time, there's truly an understanding of the one God, and there's different paths to that goal. And I personally think the story of the Jews is it's an amazing story. But clearly times are still rough, and there's a lot to do. Your book, like, it's interesting that a couple of different, whether they're scientists or whether they're sort of new age thinkers, but meditation is playing a bigger and bigger role in this. And I know that you do a very nice job of saying in your book, of saying this was my path. I've done this for a long time. The way I do it might not be for everybody. Here's some things to look at. But I think we have to talk about sort of how does that normal person, the person who's struggling with understanding this, how can that person use meditation to try to experience this for themselves?
Okay, let me, as quickly as I can, touch on a couple different types of meditations. The type of meditation that I'm talking about in my book is a type of meditation that facilitates this experience of transcendence. Transcending, of course, just means going beyond. We're not looking out at the trees, the leaves. We're letting our minds settle down and experience the sap, the oneness, So it's a transcending type of meditation. And through the regular experience of that, our minds get used to bringing that sense of the source, the infinite intelligence, the infinite creativity. Now, often in modern times, when someone says meditation, they equate it with a type of meditation that's referred to as mindfulness. And I want to make a distinction here that I am not talking about a mindfulness type of meditation, because mindfulness, even if you listen to the word mindful, we're trying to let the mind essentially empty and go beyond our thoughts and emotions back to the source. Mindfulness, and I've done a mindfulness meditation, I've taken class in it. You sit quietly, thoughts come up, you pay a little bit of attention to them, feelings come up, you may get a realization, oh, I had this thought of this person or the circumstance at work, it triggered me. Oh, maybe I can let that go. I can learn something from that. And you can grow through the experience of mindfulness meditation. It can be a very helpful type of meditation, but it's not the type of meditation I'm talking about in this book. So if you're talking about, how can the regular person, it go back to the source and have this experience of oneness, mindfulness is not necessarily the fastest path to do that. And as long as we're talking about meditation, there's another type of popular meditation called concentration or focus, where people want to expand a certain quality in their lives. Maybe they want to be more grateful, or they want to feel more courageous, or something like that. They sit quietly and they think of circumstances, or they repeat the word that they're trying to build up. Again, as they practice doing that, that particular quality will become stronger in their lives. Just like, again, you practice anything, it'll become stronger in your lives. Even when you practice going back to the source, that becomes stronger in your life. But concentration meditation isn't transcending, because your mind is focused outward on a certain quality. So to help people, you say regular, ordinary people who are looking for what I'm talking about in the book, I'm recommending that you go out and find a type of meditation that facilitates transcendence.
And that would be, you've given references to it, transcendental meditation. Is there for the listeners, or one book or website that you would point them to on
Yes.
transcendental?
Yes, you don't learn transcendental meditation through a book or a website, but you can learn about it and get personal instruction through www.tm.org. Again, let me say, this is not, I'm not, this is not commercial.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, I have been practicing transcendental meditation regularly for 48 years now, and there have been hundreds and hundreds of studies that demonstrate that it does successfully facilitate this experience of transcendence. And if you want to look for other transcending meditations, certainly go ahead and do so.
Well, it's all part of the end goal, I think, which is to internalize the uplifting interpretations, uplifting feelings of oneness, these internal subjective feelings with conduct in the real world. That's really the important thing. And that's there are a lot of people who do this, who've done it, whatever religion or whatever spirituality. There's so many beautiful people in the world that have incorporated this sense in their lives. And one of my things is that this should be a principle of science, because as opposed to just something you do in the spare time, because it is essential to who we are. And instead of understanding ourselves as sort of robot vehicles, as Richard Dawkins would say, we need to understand ourselves as spiritual beings. And I think that things improve if we go in that direction. So as we near the end here, there's a lot of things we haven't talked about. This notion of, we talked about this nothingness, and it, for me, it always goes back to, I always think about Aristotle every time you get into these discussions, which is Aristotle, very smart, genius, Greek philosopher who analyzed this question, and he came to the conclusion that if you trace causation all the way back, there has to be an unmoved mover, something that moves the world without itself being moved. And so what I think he meant was that there has to be some kind of spiritual being at the core of everything that we may never understand. And I don't think we'll ever understand, the core of being. But out of that nothingness came, we know separation came. And, a lot of folks, a lot of religions on the eastern side of life, eastern side of the world, believe in that's the true reality, that, they sort of denigrate the physical world and want to only experience the oneness. I believe you're where I'm at with this, which is that separation is essential, because otherwise, what exactly is life? So do you just want to say a couple of things about non-duality, and your thoughts on that?
At different levels of reality, non-duality can be said to be non-existent. In other words, people will say, the real truth is in the unity, and it's a fantasy, that duality is a fantasy. But you've talked about quantum mechanics, quantum physics, at different levels of reality. Different truths are different. Yeah. And so duality is very real. As I say in the book, when I was working in my workshop, and the hammer hit my my finger, the
yeah.
duality became very real to me. And so the universe that we live in, it has the quality of duality. And I'm looking down here, if I can find it very quickly, here, and I know we're coming very much to the end, but I'm going to quote a Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. He's referred to as the Alter Rebbe. He's the founder of Chabad Hasidism, and I'm not going to go into all of that. But he wrote a book called the Tanya, and he said, the purpose of the creation of the worlds from from nothingness into thingness, was that they be transformed from thingness to nothingness. In other words, the purpose of coming out from nothing, then to experience the beauty and the diversity that all that infinite intelligence gives us. The purpose of that is then to tie it back and realize at the source that it's all oneness. And that's where the circle comes. And that's an ancient Jewish teaching that I'd like to leave you with on the topic of duality.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put a sort of a cap on the conversation, because I do think that's what's been missing in understanding some of these spiritual teachings, which is that it's sort of, you go around, separateness is essential to life, but the separated beings have to understand they come from the same source and have to live their lives with that deep thought in their minds, which happens to be a natural thought. This is Philip Camella. This is Conversations Beyond Science and Religion. Pick up David's book, Transcendental Judaism. It's really a good read for Jews and non-Jews alike. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.